Greetings. My name is Byron Giorgio, and like all of you, I believe strongly that green energy and clean energy will power our economy. I'm very proud today to have two of our extreme green products, eco-vehicles, in the exhibit hall. I hope you'll all get a chance to take a look at them. It's a utility vehicle resembling a small Jeep and a three-wheeled police mobility vehicle, each running on 100% lithium-ion iron phosphate electric battery systems recharged in a regular 110-wall outlet. They are manufactured right here in Las Vegas for police, military, security, consumer, and commercial markets. It's my honor today to introduce our distinguished panel of Western governors to highlight the opportunities here in the West for clean energy to drive investment and power our economies. Western states are in the forefront of clean energy policies that are creating good manufacturing jobs and setting the foundation for long-term growth and prosperity. The panel will explore how these states can work collectively and cooperatively to complement each other's efforts to drive investment and create millions of clean energy jobs, diversify our economy, reduce pollution, and build a more secure future for Westerners and all Americans. The Western Governors Association develops policy and partnerships that advance regional interests. We are fortunate to have with us here today the chair of the Western Governors Association, Washington Governor Christine Gregoire. Please welcome Governor Gregoire. Next, I'd like to introduce California Governor Jerry Brown. I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to work with him when, 30 years ago, during his first 2 terms as governor, he was an early pioneer of the clean energy movement, advancing conservation, wind, solar, cogeneration, geothermal, low-head hydro, energy-efficient appliance standards, to name but a few of his initiatives. Just a few months ago, he was elected to serve his 3rd term as California's governor and promptly signed into law one of the most aggressive renewable energy portfolio standards in the nation. Well, Governor Brown. And here in Nevada, Governor Brian Sandoval has been an extraordinarily outspoken and strong proponent of Nevada's clean energy economy. He recently said, and I quote, "Not only do I want Nevada to be the renewable energy capital of the United States, but I want it to be the renewable energy capital of the world." Please welcome Governor Sandoval. And finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator. John Podesta is the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress. Prior to founding the center in 2003, John served as White House Chief of Staff to President William J. Clinton, and more recently served as co-chair of President Obama's transition. Please welcome John Podesta.
Thank you, Byron. Thanks, Byron. And thank you for the work that you're doing here in Las Vegas to make this clean energy future a reality. We got a great group of governors. I'm going to get right to letting them talk. I've got the easy part here, which is just to ask them a few questions. But I want to begin by noting that in this area of clean energy and renewable energy and clean technology, as we've had a lot of discussion here this morning about what's going to happen with the federal government, what's likely to happen with the incentives that have been put in place, particularly since 2009, it's always been the states that have been in the lead. The ability to work to try to get the right policies in places like California and Washington and Nevada have been critical to making the fact that we can even be talking about a clean energy revolution possible. So I'm going to begin by kind of throwing up something of a general question, but I want to start by asking all 3 of you, and we'll start with Governor Brown. What's exciting you about this? You're all dealing in a very difficult economic environment right now. You all have difficult budget problems in your states. This is one place where there's exciting things going on, and what's exciting you the most? Governor, you've been at this for a long time. Let me begin with you.
What's exciting is that I followed a Republican governor who very much advocated and pushed renewable energy and signed advocating all sorts of things. So I'm being able to carry that up. And when you look around the country and you have so much animosity between the two parties and so much dysfunction, in California, there's real continuity on the energy front. And last year, the state of California permitted 5,000 megawatts of solar or wind energy. 5,000, that's a significant number. We have applications in one stage or another for 70,000 megawatts, which would be more than equal to all the power generation that currently exists. California led the way back in the early 80s. California was the world leader in wind-generated electricity, 94% of the world's wind energy. But then the price of oil dropped. New administration came in that didn't believe in renewable energy and thought that the market would take care of our energy. Well, the fact is we import more than ever, and climate change has become more obvious. And so now we see the great opportunity of investing in our key resources, which is wind, solar, and efficiency, or as Amory Levins calls it, negawatts. So California is committed to regaining our national leadership in energy and in renewable energy, because I think I would like to say this: the sun is for California what oil is for Texas, and we have a hell of a lot more sun than they have oil. And so countries take up industries that we used to predominate in. The energy, renewable energy, is really critical to our future. It's not all the jobs by any means, but in the future, this is like the computer industry was when it was first starting, and the internet. And those kind of things start small, but they keep growing. And we're not going to ever not need energy. And I think that the renewable field, particularly in the West, is a great opportunity. So we want to connect up the grids. We want to collaborate together. And I think even though we're in tough times, I think we have a very bright future when it comes to renewable energy.
Governor Gregoire, you've made a great commitment in the state of Washington to create clean tech jobs, but you also sit as the chair of the Western Governors Association. How do you see things? What's really getting you excited these days?
Well, I come from a state where the people really are leading in this regard. It was in 2006 where by initiative they set the renewable standards for Washington state. We didn't produce any wind when the voters stepped forward to do this. We're now the 4th largest producer in the country. Photovoltaic, we have one of the largest in the country. You wouldn't believe that in Washington state, where it rains just a little bit, but we do have it. We've got some of the largest...
Huh? You and the Germans.
Yeah, exactly. We've got some of the largest biofuel companies. So, our voters were out in front, and we've taken up the mantra and identified it, along with one other, as 2 of the areas where we think we ought to focus for jobs for the 21st century. It was in 2007 where, on the heels of that initiative, I set our goals to deal with climate change. And as a part of that goal setting, I said, let's have a goal for jobs, green jobs. So we set a goal by 2020, we'd have 25,000 green-collar jobs. Last year, we got to 100,000. So 4 times what our goal was in a decade ahead of schedule. And there's a whole lot more to come. We've got over 400 clean tech companies. We're exporting it to foreign countries. So very exciting things happening in my state. We'll be the first state with the electric highway from the Canadian border to the Oregon border, soon to be joined by my colleagues in Oregon, California, so that we'll have the whole West Coast with recharging stations for the electric vehicle. And as Western governors, I really do think we're working together, probably closer on this subject than any other region in the country, getting ready for the needs of transmission, doing mapping on wildlife corridors, doing mapping on renewable zones, really targeting where the best opportunity is. And now we're in the process of putting together a transmission plan for the whole West, with all of us participating together. And then we've got something very exciting going on with what we call the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California, focused on clean energy of tomorrow and the jobs of tomorrow. So for Washington State, for the Western states, and the coastal states, we think it's an exciting time, and that we'd be very naive to sit back and do nothing with the excuse that we're in a recession. Now's the time for us to leave a legacy to our children that shows them what we can do. And I'm really very proud of what we got going in our state and the western states.
It's tremendous. I would note we walked in past those electric vehicles that were sitting in the, I guess we'll call it the showroom out there, and on the charging station point. I think a lot of us were surprised to learn that in the Type 3 chargers, you could recharge your vehicles in 20 minutes if you pull into one of those. Right. Governor Sandoval, you sit at ground zero of the housing crisis, a state when you came into office with the highest unemployment. It's come down now. It's still the highest, but yet you focused on this clean tech industry and green energy. Tell us what your theory of the case is here coming into office.
I have, and first, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to welcome the governors to the great state of Nevada. Governor Brown, I understand it's your first time out of California, and we're very pleased that you chose Las Vegas.
Maybe my last.
And Governor Gregoire, we have a long-standing relationship. We were attorneys general of our respective states several years ago. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you and what you've accomplished as the head of the National Governors Association as well as the Western governors. With regard to Nevada, and again, one thing I'd like to also point out is I see the 3 members of our Public Utilities Commission are here, a state senator is here. Renewable energy is a very high priority for me and for the state of Nevada. One of the things you talked about is I came into office in January, and we understand we have a great opportunity in this state. I'm a hands-on governor, so it's very important for me to go out to these respective sites and see what is going on. Just last Saturday, I was in a place called Tonopah, Nevada, where there's a tremendous project being constructed that will be very beneficial to the state of Nevada. There was a grand opening of the Ammonix facility here in North Las Vegas, which is going to manufacture solar panels. I've visited Ormat, which is another company in northern Nevada that is a very robust geothermal company. We just heard from the chairman of ENN, and there's a great opportunity for our state, and I've had a chance to meet with him and talk about the opportunities that we have in a town that I admire and respect very much, Laughlin, Nevada. So it's, again, important for me to visit these places. I want to work with my governor. I want to work with Governor Brown. We had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to work on Tahoe issues, and if we can figure those things out, we certainly can figure the energy issues out as well. We have a great opportunity here to have an exchange with regard to the wind power and the geothermal power. Here in the state of Nevada, we are also conducting a study with regard to transmission and looking at those corridors where it would be a natural for us. We are looking at renewable energy zones because Nevada is such a big state. One of the things that we've just accomplished, and many of you may know, Nevada is 85% federal land. So that means that we must have a very good relationship with the federal government. The Energy Office of the Governor just entered into a memorandum of understanding with the BLM, and that is going to go a long way in terms of establishing those relationships and expediting the permitting and getting through some of those wildlife issues that you talked about. I've met with Secretary Salazar back in Washington, D.C. That was one of the first introductions that I made because I know how important that relationship is going to be between the federal government and the state of Nevada. And we're doing our own homework as well. The Energy Office is implementing a program there where all our state buildings are going to have energy efficiency and perhaps some solar panels on them as well. We have a goal to reduce state energy use by 20% by the year 2015. So there are several tracks that we are working on. I do want the state of Nevada to be the epicenter. I agree with Senator Reed that I do believe that we can be the epicenter of renewable energy, not only in the United States, but the world, and I'm going to continue to work very aggressively to ensure that that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a few questions up here, but I want you to tweet, text. I think people we put up on the screens, or you have been given instructions about how to email into your own questions, and we'll try to take some from the screen. But I want to come back to the regional issues, but let me start with some of the state-based issues. Governor, you just signed into law a bill that requires 33% renewables by 2020. Some people think that's not feasible, that it stretches beyond what the technology will permit. And I wonder whether you just tell us what your plan is, what your vision for that is. You already said that you've got these solar.
Right. Well, first of all, California, 3 major private utilities are already at 17%, not counting hydro, which is substantial in California, and nuclear, neither of which generate greenhouse gases. So we're well positioned, but we have said we want 33 1/3 renewable, not counting nuclear or hydro, by 2020. I think we can make it. The permitting is there. I think the financing will be there. The question is, can we keep the cost down sufficient to make it viable and acceptable going forward? And given the 40% fall in photovoltaic prices, the prices are coming down in many respects. So there's been some shifting as to whether to have central-based power from solar or distributed through photovoltaics. But I think we're well positioned. I see this as a leadership opportunity. I think the western states are well positioned as well. The solar radiation, I know for a fact in Blythe and also in Victorville, is the most intense anywhere in the world. At least that's what the solar people said when I went to dedicate that plant. So that's a resource. That means you're getting a lot of output for the solar input that you pick up. So it's the resource that we have, and we have to develop it and exploit it. And it does take the willingness to take some risk and to put up some money, because nothing comes from nothing. You have to put money out, and these projects are financed by the utilities that ultimately come out of the rate base from the consumer. And getting it started, it's the banks, and particularly the federal government, giving loan guarantees. And then the tax credits on wind and other renewable energy, state and federal. So those are all important, and I don't see any showstopper here. We're going to move forward, and there are a lot of agencies. There's the Bureau of Land Management, you have the National Environmental Policy Act, you have the California Environmental Policy Act, we got tortoises, we got raptors, we've got prairie grass, we've got aesthetic needs that many people have to inordinate degrees, and we're going to find a way to get through all of that. And it does take the governor to push people, pull them together, because you have local, you have state, and you got federal, and then they're all broken up into little parts, and then you have individuals who can bring lawsuits. So it's all there. But we are crushing the opposition, or we're listening to it sensitively, whatever strategy is required, depending upon the circumstances. But we're making progress. We're going to make our 33 1/3 goals.
As lawyers on the panel, we're all 4 of us, we're duly humbled.
We're all lawyers. Well, you have to be optimistic.
Exactly.
And I like Nevada, if I could put in a political historical plug. I won the state's caucus vote in 1976 and in 1992. So that's my claim to fame. I never get anything else. I won the Nevada caucuses.
There you go.
So I'll keep coming back. In the primary, that is.
Governor Sandoval, Governor Brown raised the question of where the sun shines. That's not always where the people are. And there's a question of moving that power from one place in the state to another. I know that Nevada's engaged in a major project to get transmission from the north to the south. How difficult are those questions of actually being able to connect the transmission routes intrastate? And then we'll get to talk about the interstate issues and the interconnection issues.
Well, you heard from Michael Akira earlier today with NV Energy. We have what's called the online project that comes from Ely here to Las Vegas. That is going to allow us to exchange power between northern and southern Nevada. It's about 20% complete, and when it's complete, it'll provide some great opportunities for our state. As I mentioned, my Office of Energy, and Stacy Crowley, my energy director, is here somewhere. She's doing a fabulous, fabulous job in terms of working things out. But we are working on these transmission corridors. We're studying that as we speak to ensure that when these projects are located, that they can be near the transmission. Again, we're going to work very closely with the state of California on those issues. We know there's a lot of interest with our home state utility in terms of developing that. So there is a lot of time on my part and my office's part in working with NV Energy. We're working all the stakeholders to allow for that transmission so that we can capture the geothermal projects, the solar projects, and move forward.
Governor Gregoire, everybody, you of course have tremendous hydropower as well as the new push on the renewables. Everybody has an investment strategy in their own state. What does the picture look like to you at this stage with respect to the regional interconnection questions? How do you, what's the level of cooperation? And can the investments in the individual states actually support even higher levels of renewables if you think about the region as a whole?
So with in part ARA funds, the Western Governors Association has taken 3 steps towards us working together collaboratively. One was looking at the wildlife corridors to decide where transmission could and could not be located. 2, it was to look at renewable zones. Where is the best? Where is the best photovoltaic? Where is the best wind? Where is the best geothermal, and so on, so that we knew what places we had to go to. Now we're in the process of putting together the actual plan itself, but this is state to state, not within a state, which you're dealing with, Brian, but it's state to state. And really what our studies indicate to us is if we're able to achieve the renewable portfolio standards that we've all set for ourselves, absent congestion, we really don't need new major transmission across state lines. We have a problem in terms of congestion. My state, Washington to California, for example, and my state, Washington to Montana, that's a congestion problem. But if we could all step up based on the data to the portfolio standards we've established for ourselves, we have no dramatic need for more transmission across state lines, which is good news. What we do have a problem with is where we're producing the wind, for example, in Washington state, we don't have good transmission to get it to where it needs to be for the consumer. So we've got problems inside my state, for example, and one of the other problems is wind is an intermittent. And this year was a very difficult year for us because we have so much hydro. We're the #1 producer of renewable energy in the country. Most of that's hydro. Because we had so much hydro, BPA had to tell our wind producers to stop producing. When they stop producing, they don't get the federal tax credit. That's discouraging to those who want to invest in wind power in the state. So we've got to work this out. We've got to work out storage, because we could solve that problem if we had storage capacity. So inside the states, like what Governor Sandoval is talking about, we still have challenges, and what Governor Brown's talking about. But we go outside, we're really solving the problem as Western states working together. And I think, frankly, we're probably a model to the rest of the country of working collaboratively and really being smart about how we're doing it.
Does integrating the region help with the intermittency problem? Can the wind blowing in California when the sun's not shining in Nevada and vice versa, can that actually help level out and actually bring more renewables in your mind into the system?
It can. We're not done with that piece of the study, but absolutely it can. I mean, we have an issue in my state as an example where we have wind largely produced in the central part of my state that is in an off-season in terms of production to where it's done down in the gorge based on the Washington-Oregon connection, and that's a wonderful complement. So if and that's the next level of our sophistication, looking at who's producing renewables and when, and how do we complement each other in our transmission. But that's another level for us.
Governor Brown, do you have a reaction on that?
If you have a regional grid, you can move energy around in a very efficient way. It has costs of interconnection, and that gets technical and complicated. But that's something that it's obvious. Now, transmission lines are expensive, and ratepayers, don't want to pay any more than they have to. So you got to balance all the different competing considerations. But obviously, if you can send surplus energy to a deficit, and if that changes in the day or the month or the year, then the wider the interconnect, the more efficient the whole system is.
Governor Sandoval, you see it the same way?
I do. And one other thing I wanted to mention is we have a pretty aggressive portfolio standard as well, and ours is 25 by 2025. And right now we're at about 15%. So we feel really good about where we are, but we know we have a ways to go. But that transmission is something that we're going to work very closely together on.
I'm going to go to the screen, which is to go to the audience, and ask, this is to all the panelists, what will it take to put renewables on the fast track? Federal mandates, education, more government funding, incentives, or are we already on about as fast a track with your
Keep the federal
state
government
policies?
on the same path. Don't take away a tax credit 2 years after you enact it. You need long-term, stable sets of incentives and a framework. That's one. Two, you need to increase the demand, and the Navy's purchasing solar energy, 200 megawatts in California, I think. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Demand, consistency of tax policy, and then a lot of it's going to come from the states and the grassroots. And I think one of the drivers, although it's politically incorrect in many circles today, is the growing evidence that supports climate, the risk of climate change. And whether it's 80% probable or 90% or 95%, the fact is well over almost the unanimous body of scientists today are predicting a very high risk that global climate change is coming, and we've got to do something about it. And the trouble is, you don't see the real effects until it's too late. So as that becomes more real, I think people are going to reduce their carbon. As they reduce their carbon, they have to increase their renewables. And this is a great chance for investment, for world leadership, and for dealing with what a problem that we're going to have, as well as the rest of the countries of the world.
Anything to get this a good punch?
The one thing I think we have to do at the state level is make sure that we have the permitting process going on a fast track. And so we've done that in our state. We've got an agency through which the permit is delivered. They have a timeline within which they have to do it. The appeal comes directly to me. I have a very tight time frame. If they still don't like what I've done, it's an immediate fast track to the state Supreme Court. That helps. I'm with Governor Brown. We need to have predictable, sustainable, long-term incentives from the federal government. And they can't be taken away when, for instance, this year, BPA says shut down production of wind, they lose their tax credit. So Congress really needs to step up. It needs, in my opinion, to continue to invest in R&D. I think Secretary Chu has done a wonderful job. ARA funding has been essential in that area. I think we need to continue to do that.
As I said, we have something unique in our state, which is that memorandum of understanding with the BLM. And the governor mentioned we need that certainty and we need that fast track. So we have, I believe, a unique relationship whereby all the interested parties have a direct voice with the BLM, and it's already proved to be very fruitful for us.
One of the things I know that Secretary Salazar has tried to do is to try to look at the zones which have the least impact on the environment, wildlife, et cetera, the corridor element that you mentioned, and try to find places that are not exactly pre-certified, but are the places where one could expect that permitting would go faster. Has that been the approach that you've tried in your states? Does that make sense to try to to give some certainty to developers that if you try to develop in these places, the permit process can be expedited?
Well, we have an energy commission, which was incidentally created when Ronald Reagan was governor, 1974. Although when he was president, he didn't have the same interest in renewable energy. But we do have the commission, and that got things going. And you have to, instead of trying to plan it all out ahead of time, we did map wind sites. But we have this energy commission that is a one-stop shop, and that's what has enabled 5,000 megawatts of renewable energy in 1 year alone. So, and the only appeal is to the Supreme Court of California, and that has never been successful. So that's good. And then certain other projects are at the county level, and we help facilitate and push the counties to accelerate their process. So it's good to plan things, but while you're waiting to figure out where the tortoises don't live or where the raptors don't fly, you got to permit stuff and get it going and get it out of the ground. So I'd say both. And I know there's a big plan to map the desert and say this is where the tortoises get this much and the people get this much, but we're going to work it out. It's a very tough competitor because I think the tortoise has been around longer than Homo sapiens, so they may outfox us, if I may, or out tortoise us. But we're going to get them. And
Governor, I just let you know I protected those tortoises.
what? Well, we might need a little loosening. The Endangered Species Act, you know, it's good, but it, you know, we got to. Everything's a balance. You know, human homeostasis is balanced, nature's balanced, the economy's supposed to have an equilibrium, so too are all the various values, and they're complicated. And I don't think so the plan where you can figure out where to put things in advance, that's good, but I wouldn't wait for that. If you can push individual projects and permit them, that keeps things going too. So I'd say do everything you can to get it done, because it is important. It is a growth sector over time.
The Assistant Secretary of Defense, Dorothy Robine's going to be on the next panel, and I just want you to know that she and I, while I was in the White House, we protected those tortoises. So I don't want you to kill them all really quickly.
I believe we should. I had a little turtle when I was a kid. I like those little turtles, and I like the big ones. But you know, we had a governor once by the name of Ronald Reagan who said, if you've seen one redwood tree, you've seen them all. Now, that is not my philosophy. I think you want to see a lot of tortoises, so be clear. But I think if you create the right photovoltaic shade, it might actually be good for them. I don't know. Or create spaces. I think we can all learn to live together.
I'm sure we can find a way to
Can't we all live
together.
together? Isn't that a line out of some movie or something?
Governor Sandoval, how's it working in your state? You mentioned the BLM.
I've lost my train
I'm
of
not
thought
going to. We're going to get off those tortoises.
What was the question?
Yeah. No,
do you want to plan ahead of time little zones for renewable energy projects?
No, I've got it. We have a nonprofit that we've developed, and we have actually retained some contractors to study where those corridors should be. So we've got the real time. We've got what you're talking about right now. We're identifying those corridors, but at the same time, we're permitting these projects. And as I said, I was out in a very small town called Tonopah, Nevada. There was a BLM individual who was out there working with them. People are at work. It's going to be the only facility of its kind on the planet. We're extremely proud of that. So we are trying to do all things at all times.
And John, the only thing I would add is we have foreign investors, particularly in wind, and I went to visit them this spring, and they made it very clear if we will simply tell them where they can't go and where they can go, if our incentives are predictable and our permitting process has an end in sight, then they want to come even greater than what they're doing in my state right now. So I think that's a very good message to governors as to what we need to do, and so that's why for the Western Governors Association we've been trying to help all the states who some can't otherwise afford the expertise or what it takes to map the wildlife corridors, help them so that they can be able to get those investors to come in.
You mentioned foreign investors. I don't know whether you're talking about they're coming from California or they're coming from overseas, but you've had tremendous experience traveling, and Washington's known as an export state. California is a major export state. What do you see going on around the world on this question, and what's your strategy to remain competitive in the global economy?
Well, I'll tell you, I went to Copenhagen, and for those of you who were not able to do that, I really wished you could have been there. We had put together a sub-nationals group where every country that was there, their governor or governor equivalent was at the meetings. And what became unbelievably clear to me is America has ceded its leadership role dramatically in this area for reasons that just escape me, and that the other countries, we just heard what's going on in China. There's a $35 billion investment that's being made there right now. The fact that we are even debating whether this is the economic future of tomorrow, whether there are real jobs to be had there, when you get outside this country and go to other countries and talk with other countries, it's obvious, absolutely obvious. So I think it's time for America to step up to the challenge and not cede the leadership role like what we're trying to do in our respective states. And I will tell you, with 400 clean energy technology related companies, we're exporting. We're exporting like crazy right now. In my trade mission to China last fall, a company called 3Tier, which manages renewables, signed a deal with Shanghai Electric. Do you have any idea how big Shanghai Electric is? But my company was able to export the technology, and it's going to do the work there for them. And we've got other companies that are doing the same thing. So not only does it, in my opinion, make us safer, create jobs and a new economy for our states and our country, but it also is a wonderful opportunity for us to economically develop and export. And we're falling behind, and we're falling behind dramatically. And thank goodness I'm associated with govs like these who are stepping up to the challenge and refuse to cede the leadership role when it comes to clean energy to the rest of the world. And America needs to stand up and take its rightful place in a leadership role again.
Governor Sandoval, you've seen a lot of interest by foreign companies to come here and site and create American jobs. We just heard from CNN. We had an announcement this morning from Green Power, which is a parent company, is an Italian-based company. What's the future look like in terms of the leadership, the competitiveness of the United States with respect to globalization on this clean tech front?
Well, I can speak to one project, and I alluded to it in my introductory remarks, and that's with ENN, which is a very significant Chinese company that is presented today that is looking at the state of Nevada for both manufacturing and generation, manufacturing of the solar panels as well as the generation of solar panels or solar energy in Laughlin, Nevada. We're extremely excited about the potential for that because it could mean hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs for our state. It will be economic development for a place in Nevada that really needs it in a big way. One thing that I hadn't mentioned was that another thing that Nevada is doing is we are completely remaking the way we approach economic development in our state. One of our priorities is going to be renewable energy, so we will have the ability to work very closely with any foreign investors or international investors that are looking at the state of Nevada to make their investments.
Governor Brown, the California obviously created the information technology revolution, created tremendous wealth there, created a global class group of companies. Do you see that potential by this strong push for renewables in signing this 33%?
I do, and the entrepreneurs that made the microchip and computer revolution are some of the same people or their neighbors that are investing in renewable technologies. And Google is investing in that. Some of the same investment people are investing in energy. 50% of the investment of the early investment capital, the venture capital, is coming into California. So yeah, I think it's you just have to see it. I mean, when I was running for governor, when unbeknownst to me and most people in the world, Steve Jobs was in his backyard with Steve Wozniak inventing the Apple computer. And now, not too many decades later, it became for a moment there the biggest company in the world. So these companies will grow. We need the energy. We're spending probably $1 trillion on one form of energy or another in the world. So it's a big market. And as people grow, they have more energy needs. And more, you have all those gadgets You know, they never seem to turn off because you want your television immediately at the ready. So we need energy. We got to replace the old fossil fuel plants. We got to upgrade. We had all those explosions in California, so we got to upgrade that. We can use the management through through the internet and through messaging, so you can get real-time signals on how much energy you're using and how much, and you can price it by time of day. There's a lot of stuff we can do that takes investment, and the same kind of curve of rising investment and profit and jobs is in the energy field, as was in the microchip field many decades ago.
Take another question from the audience. Is it possible to realize the potential for green jobs without investing in our education system, both higher ed and K-12? Great question. Want to start?
Absolutely. And one of the things, again, as part of our economic development, I've been meeting with the superintendents of schools throughout our state, particularly here in Clark County as well as Washoe County, to start, again, developing those STEM programs, the renewable energy type curriculum, so that those students can flow into that. I had the great opportunity to visit with Neil Smastrisk, who's the president of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, right here. And he's very excited about the prospect of developing those curriculums and developing a faculty so that we can specialize in this space. I did meet with the president of our university in Reno, who's also very excited about having a center of excellence for the geothermal area. So we are working very hard as a state to make sure that we've aligned these curriculums between our K through 12 as well as our higher ed.
I'd answer the question, no, we've got to invest. I mean, America is where it is because it's the most innovative. It's the most innovative based on its education system. So failing to invest there when clean technology, clean energy is all about this innovation and new creativity at hand. An example in my home state's the Boeing Company, which now has decided that it really wants to be much more energy efficient. So it's going to launch the 787 based on carbon fiber as the mainstay in that airplane, which will allow greater consumer convenience because the windows will be larger because it's much more energy efficient, much reduced fuel. And Boeing just sent the new 747 to the Paris Air Show this spring. First time in history across the Atlantic, all engines biofuel. Our Secretary of Navy, who's going to speak today, is at the forefront of this. At the same time, we competed internationally for BMW to get a carbon fiber plant built in my state for its electric car out of Leipzig, Germany, and I'll dedicate that on Thursday back in my home state. Carbon fiber was used in a vessel that won and brought home the America's Cup, again built in my home state. So to me, that's what it's yes, it's about renewables, but it's about being very smart about new ways of thinking of energy efficiency and so on. And that takes great education. STEM, I think, is the key to the success there. And it starts in early childhood education. It goes through K through 12 and beyond. And I can't tell you the number of classrooms now where we're taking trades people and retraining them for green technology. It is the fastest growing, as I mentioned to you, industry that we have in terms of jobs in our state. It's all about retraining, training, STEM, educating, innovation, engineering. That really is the future, and I think Boeing and carbon fiber is an example of what we can do when we put our heads to it.
Improving schools, it's good for green energy. It's more important. It's even more important for citizenship and for the well-being of our community that we raise the education level and create as much opportunity as possible. At the same time, we ought to change our visa program so that these very brilliant students that come from China and India and Israel and South America aren't sent home after they get our wonderful higher education. And that's really not a good idea, you know. So we got to work at both ends. It is really self-defeating to educate and then to expel. And that's what we're doing in the research field.
You're all three of you are under tremendous budget pressure now that's finding its way down into the education system. Is this something that you see as kind of working itself through as the recession
No.
the effects of
No.
recession fall
It's,
off, or are we disinvesting in the
We're
things we ought to be
disinvesting.
investing in?
We're disinvesting in universities, we're disinvesting in community colleges, we're disinvesting in schools, in work training. In fact, we're generally disinvesting in almost everything, except renewable energy is being financed by ratepayers and by the federal government, by entrepreneurs. But when the public sector component, which is the key partner in the production of wealth, that is a massive disinvestment. Our roads we're not investing in the roads adequately, the storm drains, the sewers, the levees, the water channels. No, the accumulated bill for infrastructure is going up all the time, and we're not keeping pace. So there is a kind of a unilateral disarmament when it comes to economic investment, and it's dangerous, it's short-sighted, but it's a product of this notion that the taxes are like, some kind of sexually transmitted disease, and government is all the problem, instead of a policeman, a fireman, a researcher, a university teacher, a doctor, a dam builder or tender. So this market fundamentalism is a real impediment to the proper balance. And the creativity, I've no doubt that the creativity comes from the private sector, and you got to give a lot of that. We should smother them in any way, but there's a real role for government too, and so the right balance. That's what it is. And right now there is a flight from public sector investment, and whether it's in defense or whether it's in R&D or whether it's in healthcare, it's going to cost, and it's going to make America not the great power that it should be and can be.
So I would say we're hurting, just like these two states are hurting. But when it comes to education, we're trying to find new ways to do things to save money. And one example, for purposes of the subject today, is we now have our schools retrofitting. And so going in there, making them much more energy efficient. And they pay for it by the savings that they accomplish. We've got a company in our state called McKinstry that goes into the school, does all the retrofit, and the savings are used to pay the company back. We want that to be expanded in our state. Congress has a bill before it now to do that. Earlier you asked what could Congress do. Congress could step up to that. That is a way for this country to have much greater efficiency. The private sector is at the helm making it happen. But we also could be putting a whole lot more people back to work. So it's helping our schools in our state, it's putting people back to work, it's allowing them to save, and they're paying for it by their ability to pay for it over the long term with the savings from their utility bills.
Dr. Sandoval?
I've had an opportunity to visit some of the schools in our state, and we are installing that solar as well. There's a high school in Reno that has part of its power that's generated through geothermal because it sits on top of that resource. It's taught in the science class so the kids can learn about that generation and how that works. And as I said, there is going to be a focus in our state on that STEM education, and we are going to be, again, aligning what we're doing with this renewable energy resource.
Secretary Chu this morning raised this question of education and investment in STEM and as a critical component in continued R&D. He also, one of the other recommendations he made this morning was that the nation should adopt a clean energy standard. Most of the states have some form of RPS, but he suggested, as President Obama has suggested, that by 2035, 80% of our electricity should be produced through clean energy, and with a renewable portion being a sub-portion of that. Do you think those big market polls are the way to get the private sector to move on down this innovation cycle?
There's no doubt about it. The California 33% goal by 2020 has stimulated real investment, real money's coming in by the billions. And they know that we're committed, we're going to make it happen. And if the United States had a similar goal, it would be good. And it would cost money and it would put people to work. And you would have to come up with some money. I mean, right now we do have a problem. The federal government borrows $40 5 cents for every dollar it spends, I mean, how long can you keep doing that? So we have this paradox that the federal government needs to spend lots of money now, while at the same time cutting a lot of our future obligations that are very high. Some people estimate 66 trillion on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid alone. So with that hanging out there, we better figure out a way to stimulate the economy and push this research and development and education and all the things that will create a rising tide. Because we got a hell of a bill waiting for us at the other end.
What do you think? Can we leave it to the states, or would it be better to adopt this national standard?
Well, I would say to Congress, we ought to have a renewable standard nationally. We ought to have a national adopted energy policy. We ought to have predictable, certain long-term tax incentives. We ought to be investing in R&D. And you know what? I don't believe any of that's going to happen anytime soon, so that's why the states are stepping up and producing the leadership role they have to.
Right. Governor?
And I'd agree with the governor. Is that Nevada has made its decision to be the 25 by 25. We think we have a lot of available resources that can serve the other states, and we intend to expand upon that. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of great projects that are happening as we speak, and there are several more on the drawing board.
One of the members of the audience wants to put a finer point on our earlier discussion, which is the following question. Will your state accept the importation of out-of-state renewable power and help facilitate new transmission to make this possible? Governor?
It's interesting because the governor and I just had that conversation, because there may be a mutual interest in terms of our geothermal power and the wind power, and depending on the load demands and those things, there could be some areas of interest. We are working on the transmission, as I talked about. I think it's important that we get that sited in a proper way before we move forward, but certainly there is going to be a relationship between the states of Nevada and California.
Go ahead, Brown.
Good idea, but again, it's balance. How much we will import has to be balanced with how much we're building locally. And with the distributed photovoltaic prices coming down, there is a real rush to put up photovoltaics on roofs, on schools, roofs, on the shopping center roofs, along the freeway, along the California water plan. So we're going to generate a lot of energy, and hopefully we're going to be an exporter. But with Nevada, and I presume with Washington, there are real synergies where at different times of the day, we can move energy about, and the peak demand goes up and goes down. So I think integration is good, but we're going to try to build as much indigenously as we can, and we would encourage the other Western states to do the same, and then we put it all in a grid, and it'll work to the maximum efficiency.
In Washington, we've started calling that the race to the top. Governor Gregoire.
So when the Renewable Portfolio Standard Initiative was passed by our voters, in it was a certain process that does not, and they introduced some legislation last year. I said, stand down. We think it's a mistake. And those proponents of the initiative now admit it was a mistake, that we absolutely have to work together. Now, I don't want to take anything away from me promoting renewable energy in my state. So I don't want us to be solely an importer. I want us to be a producer for our state as well. But that's the balance I think Governor Brown's referring to. And the relationship I have more with California than I do with Nevada because of our Bonneville Power Administration is when his peak times are, when ours are, and so it's a balance all the time. That's what I think we have to work on. But I don't think we can sit in isolation and say we're not going to allow ourselves to import renewable energy from other states. We've got to do a balance in how we do it, but I don't want to disincentive my state from stepping up to its potential to be one of the leaders in renewable energy itself.
We've talked some earlier about the siting questions on transmission and the siting questions on the renewable projects themselves. The production siting. I hear a lot of people complain about the fact that those are almost two disconnected processes. Have you been able to solve that in your states? Have you thought about how you collectively cite both where the renewable projects are going to be and then where the transmission is to make the whole system somewhat more efficient?
To be honest with you, after the fact, because when the voters came in '06, passed the renewable standards, immediately the investments began, and where we produce the most wind is where we have the least transmission capacity. So now we're being forced to step up to it, but we're stepping up to it not just with what we have now, but looking out over the long term. And the Western Governors Association is trying to help the entire West look at it now. But we were behind, frankly, our citizens who were ahead of us in their vision about renewable portfolio standard. And then we realized we don't have the transmission capacity at the peak time when wind is being produced, and we don't have storage capacity. So we're working on that now. Storage is, in our opinion, one of the major flaws that we don't currently have in our system that we've got to step up to. But it's a lesson learned, but it was after the fact, at least in my state.
Governor Sandoval?
I don't mean to be redundant, but we're doing that right now. We are identifying those renewable energy zones. We are establishing those transmission corridors, and we're very confident it's going to come out well. That'll give more certainty to those that are looking to invest and expand on the projects that they have, and I'm very confident that it's going to work out real well.
Is there a master plan to do that, or is it this is just good governance? You just got to stay on these decisions every day?
Well, it's both.
Okay.
It's both, but we are going to have a plan in the very near future.
No one likes to live under a transmission line. No one wants to drive by one. They don't like transmission lines. They take 7, 8 years. In California, the utilities are moving a little bit faster. It's essentially the work of the electric company to figure out what transmission they need. But our Energy Commission also lays out state policy. So you're coordinating a state bureaucracy that's appointed with investor-owned utilities, with some public-owned utilities, with the federal government and all its different power, that, FERC and this and that, and we have an independent system operator. This is a real Rubik's Cube of complexity. It's driven where's the money to be made, and where does transmission fit into that money-making process? And the state then puts it together. So I think there's a real role for governors to convene, to pull people together, to anticipate as much as you can, and even to push the utilities, because they have a rather slow expectation as to how long it should take. And we think, at least in California, they can build them faster. Of course, we don't want them to raise their utility bills to pay for them, so that's another problem. That's why we want the federal government to give us some of that money they don't have. And so we're constrained by the complexity, by the NIMBYism, or by the environmentalism, and by the money. And no governor wants to see a sticker shock from his voters that says the bills are going up because you're building too many transmission lines. So we have to balance a whole set of factors. And the we is all sorts of different people, private, public, state, local, and federal. And getting them all together, I think, in many respects, I think it is the governor's job. And the governor can spearhead it in a more focused way than any other individual in a state.
We're just about out of time, or maybe that red light just went off, but you've all been visionary, reasonable, practical, 2 Democrats and a Republican sitting up here. I want to close by asking, would you like to give any advice to our friends in Washington, D.C. about how you can actually solve these problems, sit down at a table, and come up with a kind of vision for the country? No. Okay, let's thank the panel.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, very nice to be with you. Good to be with you again.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Governor.
Very much.